So there's an old song, 50s maybe, 60s, breaking up is hard to do. Well, when you're a platform engineer, doing hard things so that other people don't have to is kind of just part of the job description, right? So we're here today to help CI and CD. They have had a long and prosperous relationship, but it's maybe soured a little bit. It's maybe become a little toxic, a little codependent, and they've both lost a little bit of their individuality, right? What is this?
Oh boy, cancel?
I don't know what oh, there we go. Yeah, they've maybe lost a little bit of their individuality, right? I mean, we all say CI/CD, CI/CD, right? There's a slash in there, but we go right over that, CI/CD, as if it's like one thing, right? And so I'm Kent Rancourt from Acuity. I'm joined virtually, assuming that all of the video and everything works out, by my colleague, our CTO, Jesse Sewen, and we're here to make a case for an amicable parting of ways. So let's go back to the beginning of our CD journey, and kind of the fashionable way to do CD these days is GitOps, right? So as we like to say, so you've decided to GitOps. So we'll start with the Kubernetes cluster because that seems like a good starting point. This is a Kubernetes conference. And it's GitOps, so we of course need a Git repository. So we've got some manifests in here, and I happen to be using Kustomize, not really important at the moment. And we're gonna need some way to sync these manifests to our cluster. So the founders of Acuity are also the creators of the Argo project, so no surprise, we're going to use Argo to do this. We create an application resource, and it syncs our manifests that are in our Git repository to our cluster, and we're done, right? Thanks for coming. But day two is where things get interesting, right? So where we are right now, we have a single set of manifests that are being synced to a single environment, or you might say a single instance of our application. Well, that's not really super realistic, right? Dev is probably not our only environment. So to make things a little bit more realistic without overcomplicating things, we'll throw staging and a couple of production environments into the mix. So now the question becomes, if we like what's in dev, how do we progress it beyond dev into staging, and beyond that into our two production environments? Now, at this point, you're probably thinking, well, I use some kind of configuration tool, like I use Helm or I use Kustomize, right? So it's just a change to a Kustomize overlay. And you're not wrong. I mean, that's the GitOps way to do it, right? You're gonna go and you're gonna change something and then it's gonna sync. But how do you do that automatically? How do you take the tedium out of that process? So that's what we've got to figure out. Now, the exact details tend to vary from one company to the next, but we usually see some variation on this, what I call CI Kung Fu. And I'm not going to walk you through the whole thing because obviously it's actually pretty ugly and you probably can't read the writing from where you are. But in the upper right-hand corner, we have our dev instance of our application. It's just been synced by Argo CD. And we get clever and we use a post-deployment hook to signal a CI system, Jenkins, GitHub Actions, whatever, I don't really care what you're using. But we're sending a signal to another system to say, okay, go ahead and execute some tests and validate the deployment, right? So why are we doing these tests? Well, just because it deployed and came up healthy doesn't mean that we don't have a performance problem. It doesn't mean that it's not riddled with bugs, right? So we need to do some kind of verification to decide that everything actually is indeed okay. So assuming that succeeds, then we can have Jenkins, again, actions, whatever you're using, kick off some kind of script that's going to go back into your GitOps repository, and it's going to apply some kind of update to a Helm values file or a Kustomize overlay or something like that. And then we wait for a little bit, because this is all asynchronous. And then Argo CD is going to pick up those changes, and it's going to progress them into your staging environment. The whole thing repeats for your 2 production environments, only we've added a manual approval step for somebody like a product owner, okay? This is kind of complicated, but people tend to do this because GitOps doesn't really have an answer for how do you do this, or doesn't have an answer for how do you do it well, how do you do it smoothly. And this is what people tend to fall back on. But as I said, complex, I don't really want to implement that. It's linear and it's inflexible, or at least as shown here, it was linear and inflexible. It was good at carrying changes forward, but when something goes wrong, what was there in that process that handles the rollback? What if you want to put an environment in a certain arbitrary state? Make dev look like production looked last Tuesday. Maybe you're doing some forensic, research troubleshooting, whatever. How do you do that? Now, I'm not going to say that's not possible, but this was already pretty complicated. And if we want to add those sorts of bells and whistles, it just gets more complicated, right? It's also tedious to replicate. I mean, I've heard people here today talk about having hundreds of clusters, right? If you've got hundreds of clusters, if you have thousands of applications, imagine having to implement something like this for every one of them. What happens when you want to make a change to that process, and then you've got to roll it out to 1,000 applications? And then probably the worst thing, in my opinion, is that you don't have any kind of mission control. There's no single pane of glass where you can go and look and see what's running in what environments. There's no place to manage all of that stuff. If you were doing this to get a whole view, to get the view of the entire world, you've got to flip back and forth between Jenkins and Argo. Maybe multiple Argos. If you're talking about multiple clusters, you may be visiting multiple Argo API servers. You might be dealing with multiple Jenkins servers. So there's got to be a better way. And now we'll just throw in a little bit of a reality check. And this is another one of those slides that's complicated enough that we're not going to walk through the whole thing. It's just here to scare you, okay? Because this is more like reality than the simple pipeline that we were looking at before that was just dev and staging in a couple of production environments. When we look at this, we see more complex things going on, like A/B testing, and we see a product owner who has to do some manual approvals and things like that. We see human actors that are interacting with this pipeline in various ways, right? We start to see this as a living, breathing thing, right? So CI and CD, not the same thing. Our CI has a very simple goal. Take code, test it, build it as quickly as possible. Create some artifacts. Make those artifacts available somewhere. That's it. It is a short-lived process. It is synchronous. It's very small in scope. CD, all this stuff that we were just looking at, way bigger in scope. A lot of asynchronous stuff going on here. So why are we relying on tools built for this to make up for the gaps that exist over here? It doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we like to say is that people have been over-leveraging CI tools to fill in the gaps in CD. So at Acuity, we think there's got to be a better way. So we have started building something that we call Kargo. And it's open source, multi-stage application orchestration. And I think if you look at the screenshot of it here, you get a pretty good idea of what it's actually all about. It gives you flexible pipelines that orchestrate changes across multiple environments, safer deployments with guardrails, so validation, manual approvals, things like that. automated testing. Oh, that's what I just said. A dashboard, hugely important. There's your mission control center, your single pane of glass. And an intuitive UX that hides the tedium of GitOps. So how's it work? Well, basically, it's that really nasty sequence diagram turned into a proper product, right? So here in the middle, we've got Kargo, and it's watching a container repository. It's watching a GitOps repository, so that's full of manifests. Maybe it's using Customize, maybe it's using Helm. It can also watch Helm chart repositories. But when it sees changes in any of those repositories, it can work with the GitOps repository and with Argo CD to progress those changes into another environment. Then we can run some tests. We can integrate with a number of observability platforms. We can also, as the lowest common denominator, execute tests with arbitrary logic that are in a Kubernetes job. Rinse and repeat all of this to move from one stage to the next. So with that, I'm going to turn it over virtually to our CTO, Jesse, for a short demo, which apparently we have to do this way.
So now I'll be demoing a Kargo deployment pipeline in action. In this demo, I'll be showing how Kargo is used to promote a container image to different Kubernetes environments using GitOps and Argo CD. So the main view of Kargo is this pipeline view. And this view provides an overview of all your environments and what version of your application is deployed to each of your environments. It's also your interface for promoting and deploying your app to your environments. In this example, you're seeing an 8-stage deploy pipeline with a number of different environments ranging from dev to production. And at the top of the page is a list of all your deployable build artifacts, which we call freight. Then they're ordered from the most recent to oldest. And as new artifacts are pushed, new freight will start appearing on the left of the freight line so that they can be promoted into your environments. And you'll also notice that each of my stages are color coded. The colors of the stage map to color indicators on the freight line. And this gives you a high-level overview of what version of your software is running in each stage. And looking at this example, you can see my production environment is running 0072 of my application, which is a few versions behind from the upstream. And on the right, you can see some historical information about what each environment was recently running based on the intensity of the stage's colors. So Kargo's deployment pipeline is triggered by an upload to an artifact repository. And as soon as an artifact is pushed to a repository, Kargo detects this and starts the promotion pipeline. And Kargo supports monitoring of 3 different types of artifact repositories: a container repository, a Git repository, and the Helm repository. And so in my example, the dev stage is subscribed to both a container repository as well as a Git repository. And what this means is that if either a new container image is pushed, or if I go to Git and make a change to my Kubernetes YAML, then either of those changes will be a promotable artifact to my environments. And so to promote something to a stage, you click on this target icon to the left of the stage, and you can select from the available freight to promote. And one thing to point out is that depending on the stage that I select, the available freight of what I can promote becomes a filtered subset of the freight line. So, for example, if I wanted to promote to prod, you'll notice that I have only a few artifacts I can promote. But if I select dev, I'm able to select anything. And this is one of the safety features of Kargo. By default, Kargo will only allow you to promote something that has been verified in an upstream stage. And this ensures that only artifacts that have been tested and verified to be safe can flow into downstream stages. So what do we mean by verified? An artifact is verified for stage if has been successfully deployed in the upstream stage and it has passed any analysis and verification testing. Um, so let's talk about what a verification actually is. And verifications are a Kubernetes resource called analysis template and this allows you to define some form of testing that you want to happen after a deployment. Um, the testing is very flexible. It can be a Kubernetes job that runs a containerized test script, but it also can be a query to a metric provider such as Prometheus, Datadog, New Relic, CloudWatch, and others. And it can even support a custom REST API, as in this example, which is just querying a arbitrary REST endpoint, then looking at its payload to evaluate if some JSON path is evaluating to true. In this example, you'll take 5 measurements at 5 seconds apart and only tolerate 3 failures. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and do a promotion. And so to promote something, you click on the target of a stage, and then you select the freight that you want to promote, um, and click yes. And because I have Kargo configured with Argo CD, um, I can be taken directly to the Argo CD interface to see what's going on. And here you can see that it just performed this sync a few seconds ago. And if we look at what Kargo, the commit that was actually made, you can see that Kargo went to my Git repo, updated the Kubernetes manifest to go from 0086 to 0087. And so do keep in mind that for this demo, all of the promotions are manual, but this can be fully automated as well. So if you wanted a fully automated deploy pipeline to prod, you could. And the last feature of Kargo worth mentioning is the ability to manually approve artifacts for a stage. Kargo does allow you to bypass the pipeline completely and deploy directly to an environment. And this might be needed in case you are in some form of break glass situation and you can't wait to execute your normal deploy pipeline because you need to deploy a hotfix as soon as possible. And so to do this, you can select the freight you want to manually prove, select the manually approve button, and then select a stage you are approving it for. And then once done, that freight can now be deployed to that stage. Okay, so that was a quick demo of Kargo and how you can use Kargo to orchestrate your environment promotion using GitOps.
All right. Sorry about that. Okay, so wrapping up, kind of to summarize, CI and CD have some irreconcilable differences. We've been sort of leaning on CI, using it incorrectly for a very long time to make up for some of the deficiencies that exist in CD toolings. This CI Kung Fu, as I called it, isn't really the best way to solve these problems. Kargo is our vision for a better alternative. It is and will remain open source, and I've left you with a number of links here, one for our documentation. We also have a Discord server. You can obviously find us on GitHub. Feel free to open an issue, send us some suggestions, contribute, whatever floats your boat. And last but not least, we are a company. We do try to make money, so we do have a SaaS version of Kargo that is available as an early access program right now, and there's a link here for that as well. So do we have time for questions, Scott?
We do. We have 9 minutes.
All right, cool.
So you have blasted through. All right, yeah, just like raise your hands.
It's because I thought I only had 20 minutes.
So I work with KPAC. I don't know whether you're familiar with that at all. It has the ability to rebase images with the new operating system without necessarily rebuilding the entire container. It'll do that across all the images that it's tracking. And one of the common questions I get from customers is, okay, I've got all these new images that have magically been created because I have a security vulnerability that's needs to be fixed, like OpenSSL or something like that. It seems to me that this would probably be a nice way to kind of like explain that, okay, you're monitoring the repo. There's a new version of the image here. Right? Can you set up rules or something that says, okay, this is a new image of a what was previously a production release, and maybe like allow that to bypass a lot of the delivery process?
Yeah, so there are a lot of rules that you can configure at the warehouse level. So like when you make a subscription to a repository, you can say, like, these are the kind of things that I'm interested in. So if a new tag shows up for an image and it's tagged a certain way, I want that. I think you're asking about a way to kind of like take something like that and automatically fast track it to the far right side of the pipeline. We don't have anything like that at the moment, but that's an interesting idea.
The issue is, like, if you have one or two of these things, it's easy. But when you have hundreds or maybe thousands of these things that get rebased because there's a new version of the operating system,
Right.
How do you get them out?
Now, conceivably, don't you actually want that to roll through all of your environments?
If it's a code or a JVM change, probably more so. But if it's just a operating system change, like a container-based image change, probably would want to get maybe not all the way to production, but maybe all the way very close.
Sure.
Where it's just some verification is required.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
these things are actually, if you've ever worked with KPAC, they're released almost every 2 weeks.
Mhm.
And it's always rebasing new versions of containers.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, and I can see where something like this fits very nicely with that, because you can almost kind of put the whole thing on autopilot and say, yeah, I just don't need to think about that anymore.
I may not want them to go all the way to production, but
Right.
I don't want it to go through like the normal
Sure.
development process.
Sure. I think we had another question over there.
We do. And while I'm going there, Kent, I'm not on payroll with you all. I believe you do have a solution for this.
Oh.
Kargo CD's image automation controller, right? Because that plays with
You're talking about the image updater.
image updater.
So actually, this is a little bit bigger in scope than image updater. This can do a lot of stuff that image updater cannot do, but that is a good point. If you didn't want to make the leap all the way to Kargo, there are baby steps that you can take already that could do something like that.
Now what I'm doing is I have in the CI process, tell people just have a Flux that can monitor a repo, create a pull request, and then when someone actually approves the pull request.
Here we have the example of somebody who's using CI to do CD things, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I don't like it, but that's what we're doing.
he's a ringer. I had him here to help prove the point.
Right, we have 5 minutes, so we're doing well.
Hi, I would like to clarify, because the session was about CI/CD, but we're talking about continuous deployment or continuous delivery. And I have the doubt because my CTO could say, we need CI/CD for this project. But my doubt is, do you want continuous delivery or continuous deployment? And I would like to clarify if you consider stages in the organization, or just different things that have different implementations.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I wish that my answer was better. So that's going to be next year's talk, right? So this year I'm kind of making the case that we need to split up CI and CD, but you're making a great point. There's two different CDs, right? There's continuous deployment, there's continuous delivery. Now, what is the difference between those two things? If you ask 20 different people, you're probably going to get 20 different answers. I will give you my perspective on this, and I guarantee half of you in the room are probably going to disagree with me. But from my perspective, this is about delivery. It's about moving artifacts from one place to another. It's not about deploying the artifacts. Argo CD is doing that, or you mentioned Flux. Maybe Flux is doing that. But we're not handling deployment. We're handling moving artifacts from place to place. That's my take on it. People, my boss is in the back. He might even disagree. I don't know. So that's my take. I think, like I said, I'm actually not joking that maybe next year's talk is about the 2 CDs, right?
I gave you the idea.
Thank you.
Hi, great presentation. I had a question about the pipeline view of all of the various stages. It's great that there's a UI for it, but is there a way to, I guess, generate those stages via like a CLI or via an API, especially when you're managing multiple production environments, multiple test environments, thousands of clusters?
Yeah.
I can't imagine having to create those.
Okay, so I love this question because I'm not a UI guy. So everything you saw there, all of the artifacts, all of the stages, everything, they are all Kubernetes resources. So you can GitOps this stuff, right? You can actually have an Argo CD application that defines your pipeline for delivering other applications, right? It's GitOps all the way down, right? So yeah, you absolutely can do that, yes.
I have a question since I don't see a hand raised. I hear there. You have a question?
Yeah, I do, but go ahead.
Really? Okay, real quick. This is more contentious. I hear that there are plans potentially to integrate Kargo with Flux CD as well, so that it's GitOps agnostic.
I can't say that that's necessarily a high priority. I also won't say that it hasn't been discussed. What I can say is that this already works fine with Flux to a certain degree. It doesn't have the tight integration that it has with Argo CD, but the fact that it's mainly working by noticing changes in your repository and then going back to that same repository and making more changes, maybe to different branches or different folders or whatever, as long as Flux is there watching that repository, it's going to work. What you're not going to have is you're not going to see the status of the applications that were deployed via Flux surfaced here, right? If you have an Argo CD application that is unhealthy and that application is in some way associated with one of your stages, the stage is going to appear unhealthy as well. So there's information that's bubbling up when you're using Argo CD, and it doesn't bubble up when you're using Flux. But maybe someday, I don't know.
I think we have one person and then one
Just
more.
a quick question. I was curious how this would play with Argo rollouts.
With Argo rollouts. It works very well with Argo rollouts. So I'm going to go back to that thing about delivery versus deployment, right? Argo rollouts, I would say, is very much about deployment. In fact, a rollout is a drop-in replacement for the deployment resource type, right? So Argo rollouts is very much about, like, how do I take this instance of this application and cut it over from this version to this version? Whereas this is a little bit different. It's higher level. It's more about the delivery. But since you brought up Argo rollouts, you saw analysis templates mentioned here. Those are Argo rollouts analysis templates. So when Argo rollouts was built, the analysis templates were built to be used, they were built so that they could be used independently of the rest of rollouts. So we just reused them. There was no point reinventing the wheel. Yep.
We have one more question. I think that's all we have time for.
I had a quick question. Actually, Scott stole it a little bit, but the question that I had was there any thought in leveraging Argo and Flux, the Flamingo project, when you start to think about Kargo? Was there any insight into doing that, or
Uh,
more.
leveraging in what way?
So just sort of the best of both worlds, where you have Flux CD and Argo, which gives you that visual representation.
Mm-hmm.
And like that project in and of itself kind of provided that overarching GitOps, but with a UI attached to it.
Oh, okay. Flamingo is catch me up here. Flamingo is the thing that makes the Flux backend work with the Argo CD front end.
Correct.
Yeah, I unfortunately I don't think I can really speak intelligently to that question. I haven't actually played with Flamingo, to be honest with you.